Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining the UCCE Master Gardener Dorado County. We're here today to teach a class bringing birds to your goal just to get a class from you. Gardener, how do you describe live and what is the site? While you're doing the poll, I'm going to give you some other logistical information. Thank you for attending our class on bringing birds to your garden today. Our class is being presented by two master gardeners, Gail Fullback and Pat Trimble. We will get started in just a couple of minutes. So first, I have a couple of housekeeping items to communicate to you. The presentation will be about an hour long. We appreciate and encourage questions, and we'll do our best to address all of them at the end of the presentation. Since we have quite a number of participants today, we have muted everyone except our presenters. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. We will collect them and go through them at the end. We have shortened this presentation from its original 3 hours to make it more comfortable in a virtual environment. Because of this, we may not get to every topic, but we will do our best. Information presented here will be available in our UC Master Gardeners of El Dorado website after this class. Link to our website will be put in the chat window. Okay, did you respond to the poll? If yes, thank you so much. If not, please do that now. I'll leave it on for just another minute. Okay, it looks like 32 people have voted, and I'm going to read to you what the results look like. We have 63% are master gardeners, 38% are not master gardeners. The second question, how do you describe where you live? 97% live in foothills with oaks and toyon, and 6% live with mixed conifer. Finally, what size is your yard? 38% less than half an acre, and 63% are more than half an acre. So I'm going to share those results with you. And that just gives our presenters a good idea of who you are and what kind of yards and gardens you have. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to let Gail take the driver's seat. And thank you so much for being here today. Take it away, Gail.
All righty. Hi, everybody. Thank you guys for participating in our first El Dorado County Master Gardener Zoom class. This is kind of new to some of us, and so I know you'll forgive a few little glitches here and there as we go along. I wanted to thank Tracy very much for being our host today. And let's just move right along here, assuming I don't have too many technical difficulties. We want to bring birds to our yards because we like birds. Birds are really useful in our habitats, in our ecosystems. They help us with pollination. They help us with predator control, insect control. They're fun to watch, and you know, they're just part of our environment, and we like to have them. This is a picture here of a white-headed woodpecker taking a bath, which is kind of one of the funnest things you can watch. Is when a bird gets near water, they just get all excited and they have a big old bath, and you can see the water spraying around. And as it turns out, water is pretty much the #1 thing you can do to attract birds to your yard. If you want to keep birds in your yard and hopefully attract them to nest, then of course you need to provide a few other things. So food, water, and shelter are the 3 main things. I'm going to be asking you guys questions and looking at your faces and hoping to see nodding. Or if you can't understand me, do this. And if you know what I'm talking about, maybe do this. As we go along, we'll try to interact a little bit. So food, water, and shelter, and plants provide two of those three things, food and shelter. Now, since native plants evolved with our native birds, native plants are always a really good choice. Just a little side note on shelter. I got this photo from one of our fellow master gardeners, Tony, who has a display of ornamental birdhouses. And one bluebird here decided, well, ornamental or not, that's a great place to live. So they moved in and raised a family. So birds are very creative and opportunistic, and they'll take advantage of whatever they can find. So provide, as an instance, that bluebird is a cavity nester, provide cavities or just leave cavities on existing plants, for instance, and you may find birds have moved in there. Here's a cedar waxwing enjoying some toyon berries, and most of us in El Dorado County certainly are familiar with toyons. If not, if you don't have any growing on your property, that's a really great plant to provide both food and shelter for birds. Here we have this is a Bohemian waxwing, which is would be a real good bird if you found one in your yard. Often flocks of cedar waxwings, which are our more common bird that come through here, will have a Bohemian waxwing in there. And again, he's having some toyon berries there. So as we said, we want to start with natives. The flowers, the fruits, the seeds are all used by birds, and because they co-evolved, they're used to each other. Here's a picture of a fully grown toyon. It's really beautiful. They call it the Christmas berry sometimes because it does bloom in the winter. It fruits in the winter. And as you can see, that's a lot of berries for a bird to eat. Also provides a lot of nice cover, dense, protective places for birds to just hang out and rest. Another fairly large shrub that's very useful for birds, black elderberry, Sambucus nigra. Now, as we go along, I could see by the poll, and of course our county is very diverse in terms of who we all are and our habitats. So we'll be talking about large shrubs, which may not be appropriate for those of us living on really small properties, but we'll get into some of the smaller shrubs too. So there's certainly a plant or two or more that will work for all of us. Just not, some of them are going to be too big for you, and some of them may be too dry or too water liking, but we'll just keep going here. So the black elderberry has these wonderful berries, very edible for humans. You can make jelly and wine and jam and stuff, and also birds really like them. The plant is beautiful. You often have flowers and berries going at the same time, which is a really cool thing. It's also can be a host for a federally endangered species of beetle called the valley elderberry longhorn beetle. My co-instructor Pat likes to talk about these, and this is when I would turn it over to her, but we're having technical difficulties, so you'll have to struggle along with my explanation of it. It is associated with the host plant Sambucus nigra, which is the elderberry, in all life stages. The plant has, it's kind of hollow in the center, so the stems have a very loose, it's pulpy, but they are hollow. After a while, they become hollow. The Native Americans used to use the branches and the stems to make flutes out of. So anyway, that's the valley elderberry longhorn beetle. And there's a picture of it. This would make really good bird food, by the way, but it being endangered, maybe we don't especially want to we'll have our birds eating those as much as other things. And there's a picture of the inside of a stem. That pulp rots away pretty quickly and or is eaten away. The larvae of the beetle can stay inside the pulp. If conditions aren't right, they won't hatch out until, they might stay in there for a year instead of just hatching out right away. Okay, so here's a really cool common local bird called the phainopepla. Got that little punk hairdo kind of thing. We see the phainopeplas nesting in dense foliage in tall shrubs or trees. They eat berries. They like berries a lot. It's called a flycatcher, but actually it is omnivorous. It will look for berries such as mistletoe, elderberry, poison oak, juniper, grape. We have a native grape, as you know. And they also like to eat insects. Almost all terrestrial birds will be using insects during this time of year, which is breeding season. Insects are higher in protein and fat, and that's the only way they can really get their babies up to speed. Baby birds it only takes 2 to 3 weeks in the nest from hatching until they're fully feathered and ready to fly. 2 to 3 weeks is an enormously short time to gain enough weight and put on enough feathers to be ready to fend for yourself out in the wild. So they have to go for the most dense food that they can get. And caterpillars are one of those really dense foods that they use. Here's a female phainopepla. How about that red eye? Pretty cool. Again, the punk hairdo. So they look quite a bit similar, just the male is black, the female is gray. And here she is on an elderberry. And she looks pretty happy to me. Let's see. They kind of move around too. You don't always see them in the same place. They move around as the berry crops ripen. So another nice shrub, this is smaller than some of the two I mentioned before, than the toyon or the elderberry. This is a pink flowering currant, Ribes sanguineum. Beautiful spring flowers. And then of course it has berries too. It's a currant, so it has berries. Here we've got manzanita. We're all familiar with manzanita. And don't know if you had really thought about that as a good shrub for birds, but these little bell-shaped flowers are really great for small pollinating insects. And the berries it produces are well liked by birds and are a good food source. So in fact, manzanita translates to little apple in Spanish. Another smaller shrub, serviceberry, Amelanchier. It's a nice native. Also has fruits that are edible. In fact, I've had serviceberry jam before. It's actually pretty good. And of course, birds like it. And any of these shrubs are great for providing cover as well as food. So, for instance, the spotted towhee, which is in the sparrow group, a little bit bigger than most of the sparrows we're familiar with. This hops around on the ground. It does a lot of foraging down there, eats insects. It's omnivorous, berries, whatever it can find. That's something that you might find in these shrubs that we're talking about. There's also a relative called the California towhee, which at first view is kind of plain looking, but when you look at him, he's actually kind of cute. He's under his vent there. He's got that rufous color and very similar habits to the California towhee. They hop around on the ground, forage, eat insects. they'll glean insects off of leaves and things too, generally in the understory and in your shrubbery. A lot of these birds are already in your yards, and you may not really notice them. You may not see them. If you take your morning cup of coffee out and sit on the back porch and just sit and listen, you might be surprised at the sounds you hear that just seem like background noises. But if you focus in on one or two of the sounds, you might be able to spot the bird that's making it. We have our California quail, of course. Pat, yay! Pat's making the quail sound. Pat's our co-instructor.
Pat's app is making the quail sound.
Thank you, Pat. I had to do the Valley elderberry bark beetle all by myself.
So sorry, I've never had a problem with Zoom before.
Yeah, do the quail again, and let's see if we can all hear it. So that sound should be really familiar to all of us, because we have quail all over our county. The first part was the call we say he's saying Chicago, Chicago. But the other sounds were little family type sounds. It sounded to me like the parents make these little clucking kind of sounds and their chicks back and forth so they know where each other are. Because they're often the understory and they may not see each other. And a lot of times birds communicate with each other by sound for that reason, because they can't necessarily see each other in the brush. Okay, and that's our state bird, California quail. You see how the male has the dark chin and the little kind of white outlines and the big giant white eyebrow, and the female's a little more muted. That's so she's more, less easily spotted when she's on the nest hatching her eggs. Okay, now after water being the most precious thing you can provide for birds, oaks are one of the best plants you can have in your yard or near your yard. And I know that not everybody has room for an oak tree in their yard, because they do take up a lot of room. And they take a long time to grow, so it's not like you can just plant one today and enjoy its benefits. But if you're lucky enough to be near oaks, you can spend some time there and you'll see just the incredible diversity of insects, reptiles, birds, just life. They're just full of life. And they may be full of caterpillars, and we all like caterpillars because they feed those baby birds. They may be full of them, and you wouldn't even notice the damage, because there are so many leaves. There's just plenty of food for the caterpillars, and the caterpillars provide plenty of food for the birds. So here we have a black oak, and you can see the catkins. That's the male part of the reproductive system, and the catkins are often filled with tiny insects because they're eating pollen and searching around for, I'm sure there's a tiny bit of nectar in each of those little anthers. So that's another source of insects for birds. Here's another view of the catkins. You might find oak titmouse, which is pretty cute, huh? It's got that little crest. It's gray. It has a variety of calls. A lot of times you'll be out in the yard and you'll hear what sounds like 5 or 6 different birds. It could be the same titmouse. They have just an incredible variety of sounds. And I think Pat's working on getting us. Okay.
You want more?
That's good. It gave me a chance to take a breath. Okay, we were talking about black oaks. California black oak can live up to 500 years of age. You see them more in a little bit higher elevations. I have a couple. I'm in Shingle Springs, right near Ponderosa High School. I have a couple on my property, but they're not as happy as my blue oaks, for instance. Whereas Pat lives in Placerville. Do you have any black oaks on your property or nearby?
No, I have one live oak. Actually, there's a couple of small black oaks, but they're little guys.
So as you go up Highway 50, or if you, let's say, Slide Park, the black oaks tend to live in canyons. In the drier parts of the county, if you have black oaks, they'll be more in a canyon where they can get more either shade or moisture or both. And then as you go higher up, you see more of them. Oops. Okay, so that's black oak. You can tell it's a black oak when you look at the leaf and you see these prickles at the ends, very tiny little prickles at the ends of the lobes. That identifies it as a black oak, in case you're wondering. And then that's the acorns too. So again, with the prickles, and that's the bark. Red-breasted sapsucker is a bird you might see while you're sitting under an oak pondering your navel or whatever you ponder, or just maybe with a pair of binoculars. They overwinter here. They breed in the higher elevations of the county. They also, like the bluebirds we talked about, they're also cavity nesters. And they will not drill their own cavities out. They'll use cavities that are already there. Of course, they will improve them because, you know, you got to make it yours. So they breed primarily in coniferous forests, but they also use the deciduous and riparian habitat, which is why you could see them in the oak trees. Because the oaks have such a variety of wildlife in there, including insects. It's a really good place to eat. And they have multiple strategies for eating. They can pry the bark up and they'll find insects under there. They glean off of leaves. They probe. They tap, which sometimes brings insects up. They also do little fly catching, which is really cool because it's a fairly big bird to see it fly out, catch a fly, and then fly back. That's a cool thing. And they drill a series of shallow holes in the bark of trees, and you may have seen, it's kind of hard not to notice when a tree has been used by a sapsucker. So they'll drill a series of shallow holes, which causes the sap to ooze out, and then they come back and lick up the sap. So that's your red-breasted sapsucker. We also, in oak trees, oh, here's a closer look. Cool. We also, in oak trees, will see the white-breasted nuthatch, which Pat's gonna play for us, perhaps.
Sorry, I was chatting.
You're chatting. White-breasted nuthatches.
Yeah, someone asked about the app I'm using, so it's in the chat.
Oh, good. So has anybody heard that when you're sitting out, let's say in the woods? It's a sound that really travels through the trees and it goes for a long way. So you might hear it and the bird could be a quarter mile away, not within view, but the voice really travels. The white-breasted nuthatches and their buddies, their relatives, the red-breasted nuthatch, look similar, but you can see the red on the breast, a little bit smaller than the white-breasted, and usually they live a little bit higher in elevation. They both like large meaty seeds. They also will often make trips to feeders, way more trips than they're able to eat. What they're doing is collecting a seed, one seed at a time usually. They fly it back to a tree and then they'll stick it into the furrow of the bark. And then later on, they eat those when your feeder is empty, they go back to where their little stash is. And that's where they got their name. They hatch the seed out of the furrow in the bark where they planted it. You see them in mixed flocks with chickadees or titmice. And one study found that when titmice were removed from a flock, the nuthatches were a lot more wary and less willing to visit exposed bird feeders. So you kind of assume from that they're relying on the titmice to kind of help look out for danger and things. So, okay, what else do we have here? There's another picture of the red-breasted nuthatch. Very cute. You see them mostly on the trunks of trees. They climb the trunks of the trees. Did anybody just hear my parrot in the background?
I was going to say that was not me. I did not do that.
I know, they were supposed to be banned in the back bedroom. Here's another really nice picture of the red-breasted nuthatch, that beautiful red breast on him or her. Back to the oaks. Here's your blue oak, very common in our county, of course. We didn't really talk about the food value of acorns, but acorns are a big food source for not only insects, but also animals. And surprisingly, ducks like to eat acorns. Let's see, is that coming up? Yeah, there we go. So here's a wood duck. This is a female wood duck. They're not your classic duck that you think of in terms of where they live and where they raise their babies. Wood ducks are cavity nesting. They choose a hole, a cavity, in somewhere around within 500 feet of a source of water. And like I told you, I'm in Shingle Springs near Ponderosa High School, and I have had wood ducks nesting in my oaks. It's very surprising to hear something quite large flapping out of an oak tree and then hitting the ground and wandering around and then gathering up acorns. And that's what these guys do. Their babies, now ducks are precocial, which means that their babies are good to go as soon as they leave the nest. I'm gonna have to get my, hey, Greg, Cheetah. Sorry. Here's the male, which may be a little more familiar to people. They're quite shy. So when you walk up on a pond, for instance, if they're on the pond and they hear and see you, which they will because we're big, clumsy humans, they'll usually fly off. So you don't always get a real good view of them, but they're quite spectacular. And of course, here's the little sweet pair. Okay, and unlike most other ducks, the wood duck has sharp claws for perching in trees. The female will lay between 7 and 15 eggs. And I started to say about the precocial chicks. Once the chicks have hatched, it's kind of hard to watch, really. They jump out of the tree, and these trees are the holes in the trees are at least 20 feet up. The chicks just either get pushed out or jump out. I think maybe a combination of both. And then off they go to the water. So these birds tend to like to try to find a hole that's over the water because that's obviously a much softer landing. But the ducklings can swim on their own and find their own food. So they, as I mentioned, they eat acorns, and when they're small, I don't think they eat acorns probably as much as berries, seeds, and insects. Don't forget those insects. Okay, how about interior live oak, another very common oak species here. You can identify it with these This is not a lobed leaf like the black oak, but it has all the prickles on the edges. And here we have the acorn, kind of a slender acorn. Now, if you're a propagator, you like the one on the right. If you're not a propagator, you like the one on the left, because look at, see the holes there? I assume you can see my cursor. The holes there indicate that an insect has bored in there. And we like insects because the insects are feeding the birds. We like the birds. Okay, so some kind of larva is going to develop in there and then pop out of the hole and do its thing. Okay. Bullock's oriole, very pretty bird that can be seen in lots of different trees, oaks, willows, cottonwoods. In migration, you can find them in any habitat. I think I have a picture of the female or not. There we go. There's a female. She's actually not so bad herself. I mean, she's not as striking, but she's got some nice color to her. They also fly out periodically and catch prey in the air, but they also glean a lot of insects, small invertebrates, including many caterpillars. And they go for fruit. So if you have feeders and you like to have birds around, you might be able to attract them with a fruit feeder. Okay. Another bird that looks a little similar coloring, the western tanager, and similar habit actually. You find these, and the orioles too, usually a little bit higher up than where I am in Shingle Springs. Tanagers nest in conifer forests, but again, during migration, you can find them almost anywhere in nearly any habitat. They forage mostly in the tops of trees, and they also fly out and catch insects. They will also regularly visit flowers, probably to feed on both the nectar and the insects that they find there. So that's a cool bird. In the summers, we find them in the Sierras a lot. And there's the female, kind of muted, but pretty important for the reproductive cycle. And here's another plant. As you can see, we're just kind of bouncing back and forth between plants and birds. This plant is coastal. It's a California native, but you find it more coastal, all up and down the coast actually. Salal, very pretty leaves. It's low growing. And so being more of a coastal native, it's something if you wanted it in your yard, you'd want to put it somewhere where it would get afternoon shade. Perhaps a little more water than some of your other natives. It's in the same family as manzanita. It's got the same cute little bell-shaped flowers there. And it also produces berries that are edible. I've eaten them, they're actually not too bad, but prefer to leave them for the birds. Okay. And,
you might have noticed this plant if you bought a floral arrangement. It's often used for greenery.
Yes, and this is lower growing too. So this is one of the ones that you could use as a ground cover. So we're going to jump from a ground cover to the coffeeberry, which can be a very large shrub, but it's very useful for wildlife. It's got a lot of foliage, as you can see, a lot of great hiding places for birds to get in there and get away from predators. And by the way, we got a question about someone who's been feeding birds, and then suddenly the cats realized, well, this is the feeding ground for us. And she wants to know how to keep the cats out of her yard. And I'm sorry to say, I don't know any way you can possibly keep cats out of anywhere. So better to provide cover and protection for the birds that are on the feeders. And something like a shrub like this would be helpful if you have room for a large shrub or even a small shrub. Also, putting your feeders up on a pole so that it's too far for the cat to jump is one strategy. And the same thing for water. bird baths are notorious for drawing cats because they'll hang out and wait, and then the birds are a little bit wet and aren't flying quite as well as they would ordinarily, and it's easy pickings. So elevating them so the cat can't get to them is probably would be my suggestion. Pat, you have any other ideas about that?
No, I have 2 indoor only cats, and they sit and watch all the neighbors' cats saunter through the patio and hang out under the bird feeders. And yeah, you can only chase them away so many times in a day.
Yeah, well, and she did say she would speak to the owners if she knew who they were.
Right.
And I think we've all read the studies about cats. Outdoor cats just have such a much shorter life because there are so many things out there that either want to eat them or run over them. But if you don't know whose cat it is, the best thing you can do is just try to protect the birds that you have. Okay, we've got.
The estimate is over 2 billion birds a year are killed by cats in the U.S.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
The rhamnus, this coffee berry, the rhamnus, or the Frangula californica, new name. These are the berries, and they're really quite pretty, and they're also a really good food source. There's a large seed in there. I think it's 2 seeds per berry, and they're a little bit like a grape. They're quite fleshy, and then with large seeds, they're a little like a grape seed. Okay. So ceanothus is another plant that we have so many of in our county, and we have a lot of different varieties. We also like to, as humans, we like to have cultivars because, oh, I like that plant, but it's not quite purple enough, or it doesn't have as many flowers as I want. So we make cultivars, and that's okay. But also some of the natives without any cultivar, for instance, the Ceanothus cuneatus down here is really quite spectacular. Again, you've got lots of cover. I'm sorry, my bird is making too much noise. Would you take her? She wants to be part of the party. And then over here on the right is Ceanothus blue jeans, and that's one of the cultivars that I was talking about. And then here is Ceanothus Ray Hartman, which is pretty large. You can turn that into a tree. You can grow it as a shrub or a tree, but either way, in full size, it's quite large. But beautiful in the spring, it's fantastic. And in the spring, these ceanothus are just covered with pollinators, often bees, but all kinds of insects are drawn to these. It's an early blooming, ceanothus bloom early, as you've noticed, just driving up and down the freeway, you see them. So it's a nice harbinger of spring. Another really great bird for plant for insects is St. Catherine's lace. It's in the buckwheat family. This is one of the largest buckwheats that I know of. There's also California buckwheat. And honestly, this one isn't quite locally native that I know of. Pat, do you know? Gina, do you know?
No.
I believe it's...
I don't know. I don't think so.
No, it seems to me, I should have looked this up. Anyway, the California buckwheat is another one that's more local. But either way, you can see how many flowers there are. The buckwheats have these tiny little flowers that are favored by tiny little insects that do a lot of the pollinating. And the tiny little birds do fine eating those tiny little insects. So it's a good source for bringing birds in. And they're also beautiful. Let's see if I have another buckwheat for you. There's a close-up, and they are a classic plant for butterflies. And of course, the butterflies are going to be laying their larvae, which turn into caterpillars, which are one of the best sources of food for birds, trying to get those babies fledged after only 2 weeks. Okay, that's a metal mark, I believe, that butterfly. Here's the California currant, Ribes viburnifolium, another plant that you can keep. It's a ground cover. You know, if you want to shear it a little bit once a year, you can keep it low, even lower. Normally it'll grow about 1 foot or so. Shiny, bright leaves. When crushed, they smell like wintergreen. It's a very nice plant, low maintenance, low water. You can plant it under oaks. The flowers are kind of hard to, they're not showy, but and they're small, and the plant is kind of can spread. So when it's flowering, you may have to go out and look for the flowers, but if you do, you'll see that they're really quite pretty. And this is a great plant for, it also produces little berries, it's a currant, and great cover. Things like quail and those towhees we were talking about, and any of your sparrows would like to hang out in a place like that. Snowberry, another good plant for under oaks. You don't have to water it. It is deciduous. It's a ground cover. It can grow up to 5 feet tall. Spreads by rhizomes. It can form a dense thicket when conditions are favorable. Can be used for bank stabilization. And as I said, it's good for under oaks. Now, if you plant it somewhere where, and it's got the cutest flowers, they're pink. And then it's called snowberry because the berries are white. And I was going to say, if you plant it somewhere with a lot of water or enough water, it can turn into a huge thicket, which if you're a sparrow, this is awesome. If you live in a place with CCNRs, you're going to have notices on your door. So just be mindful. It doesn't need much water. And when you give it water, you could get something like that. And then you're into a cycle of needing to prune back. And, you know, we don't want to be slaves to our yard. So here are the berries. And I read that they're toxic to humans. And I've never tried it, so I can't, you know, I live to tell that I haven't tried it. But they are definitely good for wildlife. And they're kind of plump, you can see. Okay, so that's snowberry. We have wild ginger. Which likes to have a little bit of shade, a little bit of moisture. If you've got a shade garden, that would be a great plant for that. And it's got the sweetest little flower. And again, this would be, it will spread slowly by rhizomatous roots and provide nice cover, and it stays very low. Another ground cover, woodland strawberry, which if you don't have deer, which means you'd have to be fenced basically if you don't have deer, that's another really nice ground cover. And of course the birds will go crazy over the little berries that come on there. Wild grape can, when given enough moisture, really take over, as you may have seen if you've been down by the American River, or, well, there are several places where you can see this just growing up and over, kind of like reminds you of kudzu down in the south. But it's a grape, and it's a very nice source of food for birds. And of course, cover is important. Back to the buckwheats. This is Eriogonum umbulatum, sulfur buckwheat. It's just gorgeous. As it, I mean, it's just this huge showy blotch of yellow when it blooms, and then as it starts to fade, it turns into this red, and pretty soon the whole plant will have this beautiful rusty red color. It's really pretty. And as we were mentioning back with the first buckwheat I introduced, which was the St. Catherine's lace, and also the California buckwheat, tiny little flowers. These are umbels with tiny little flowers in there. the small insects really go for that. There's a lot of pollen apparently in these, because otherwise I guess the insects wouldn't be going after them. Sages are another great plant for insects and therefore birds. Hummingbirds like them too. Hummingbirds really like sages. You'll get a lot of butterflies on sages. They have nectar and pollen, and they are a host plant to many caterpillars too. We have on the left, I don't remember what we have on the left, sorry. On the right is white sage. And then this is a pale swallowtail on a Brandagie sage. California has 18 species of native sages, salvias. There's a cool thing about sages too. The flowers can be structured such that a specific weight needs to land on them to open up the throat, so the insect, often a bee, also hummingbirds, can get in there and reach the nectar. And so the cool part about that is that, see the anthers dipping down onto the back of that bee? The anthers are releasing their pollen onto that the back of that furry bee there. And then he goes to another plant that maybe the anthers have already given up all their pollen. And at that point, then the stigma is receptive. And so then the stigma is going to bend down and catch the pollen off of that insect, and that's how the plant pollinates itself. Pretty cool. Okay, so another sage here. Has anybody got this on their property? It's a beautiful and very tough native. It's a little bit tender if you go beyond, let's say pollock pines would be about the limit, maybe a little below that. It will grow back. I've had snow on mine. As I said, I'm here in Shingle Springs. It doesn't really snow here anymore, but when it did, I was always fearful I had killed my salvia, my Sonoma sage. But no, it just died back to the woody stems and it came right back. So very hardy, and as with most of the sages, just tons and tons of flowers, and it blooms for a very long time, and it's very attractive to us and also to the insects and birds, hummingbirds. We've got sparrows. The white crown and the golden crown sparrow are winter birds here. Pat's going to be playing our white crown sparrow. There we go. Are you chatting again?
I thought you were going to play this one.
No, I disabled it.
Okay. That's the white crown.
And he said, what does he say? Doesn't he say something? Doodly dee dee dee. Do it again.
Sure sign that spring is coming.
And then we've got our golden crown sparrow. And as we said, these are usually on the ground, foraging. And they'll eat insects just like most terrestrial birds will, almost all terrestrial birds will be eating insects to feed their broods. And incidentally too, I mean, sparrows are known for being seed eaters, but they also eat insects. Okay, so kind of wanted to show you, I'm gonna do a quick hummingbird thing. California fuchsia is another nice native, low growing, can get weedy if you give it too much water. There are cultivars that are a little more erect and a little brighter. There are lots of different colors of foliage. The native one, as you can see here, is grayish. The foliage is grayish. And some of the cultivars, the foliage is greener, but it's a very nice plant for hummingbirds. And the flowers really are beautiful. And as I said, it can get weedy if you water it, so you probably want to leave it in a nice dry spot where it won't spread too much. So hummingbirds, we have 3 that are real common around here. Anna's is a year-round resident. It's got the red throat, the ruby red throat, but you differentiate it from the East Coast ruby, what's it called? Ruby crowned hummingbird. What's it? Ruby throated hummingbird. Because that has red, that does not have red on, that has red on the head. This Anna's does not.
The Anna's does, not the ruby throat.
The Anna's has red on. I shouldn't have gone there.
The ruby is red all the way down the throat.
So we also get rufous. They come through in migration in the spring and in the fall. And if you have feeders, one thing about hummingbirds, and most birds really, they will remember sources of food. And when they're migrating, they're certainly looking for food. So we might be able to attract birds to nest in our yard, but if they're migrators and they want to nest somewhere else, that's where they're going to go. But you might be able to attract them during migration, which is always kind of fun because you see a whole different palette of birds than you're used to. And rufous is one of them. So it's always kind of fun in the spring to see the first rufous hummingbird, and they actually make noise with their wings, kind of a metallic sound. And it's always fun to see them. They're just gorgeous. They're also very territorial, so they'll chase your annas off the feeder if they can. And then we also get black-chin hummingbirds, mostly migrating through in the spring and fall. But we do, I realized that we have 1 or 2 here that seem to be staying. So I'm sure they're breeding because it's definitely breeding season now. And down South Shingle Road, I know a few people who have these too. They've got this gorgeous, you have to see it in the right light, but this beautiful purple on the throat is really nice. Okay, and so I just want to reiterate, the birds really rely heavily on insects to feed their young. And caterpillars, you can see how nice and fat those caterpillars are. So one caterpillar is just a great source of food. Instead of 15 or 20 different gnats or mosquitoes or something like that, then one caterpillar is a big bonus. There's a beautiful bluebird with a big fat caterpillar. And here's a hummingbird. And hummingbirds, most people think they are just nectar feeders. When they're raising babies, they catch flies and they glean for, when I say flies, flying insects, and they glean for insects too. And that's what they're feeding their babies most of the time. Okay, well, I want to jump off to, do you want to play Junko? Is that it?
You want more?
I didn't hear it.
No?
There we go. My volume's down. So dark-eyed junco, and I mostly just showed this because I have a great slide of, now that's one foray. This bird has been out there on one foray and collected all those caterpillars, and clearly he's on his way back to a nest to feed babies. So, okay, I'm gonna jump off to, we talked about water, and I think what I would really like to do is go to CalFlora. So I'm gonna stop the screen share and hope that you don't get freaked out by my desktop. And go to, wait. What I want to show you is CalFlora. You have a link on your chat to our handout that Pat prepared, and it's got a lot of resources, one of which is CalFlora. There are a ton of good resources there. So are we seeing it? We're seeing it now, CalFlora? Pat?
Yes.
Okay, so there's a spot, it's just calflora.org, very easy to find. There's a spot where you can search. Now, over here on county, I'm hoping you can see my cursor without too much trouble. You can pick whatever county. So we're in El Dorado, we're gonna pick El Dorado County. And then you can pick, do you want a grass, a tree, a fern, a vine, an herb, a shrub? So let's say we want a shrub. And then over here, we're gonna pick, do you want annual, perennial, biennial? Since it's a shrub, I don't, we'll say it's perennial. Native status, do you want it native? Yeah, sure, because really, why not? And then what's our community? Are we in a bristlecone pine forest? Are we chaparral? It doesn't really have mixed oak, which is what I would choose, but except for southern oak woodland. But I thought maybe mixed evergreen forest, so that would be more for the people up in Pollock Pines, let's say. And then we're gonna ask it to search. And it'll come up with stuff that is already native and existing. So you might want a vine maple, for instance, or this shrub called false indigo, or pipe vine, or coyote bush, ceanothus, and then there's going to be a whole list of different ceanothus that would work for you. So that's an incredibly great resource for you to do the research on what might work in your yard. Here's the coffee berry down at the bottom down here. We've got monkey flowers. We've got yerba santa. So I just wanted to show you how easy it is to find information about what to plant. And we do have these 7 tips to, I'm gonna jump to a different slide if I can. Just trying to sum up, and then we'll take questions. And I have to apologize, I have to jump off the call, but Pat and Tracy will stay on the call. I'll jump off at about 10 after, in 10 minutes. Let's see, 97. Thanks for your patience. I'm kind of not sure how to do this.
Is that Greg?
That's our, we're not bird geeks at all. That's our bird clock.
That's the clock.
Oh, I know what I have to do. I shall jump to 97. My botany instructor, Jenna Meyer, is on the call, and I'm now going through what she was going through when she was trying to teach us how the heck to continue a class when you're doing it virtually. Okay, I think I got it. Seven tips for landscaping for birds. Play from current slide. So just to sum up, we've got providing water. Remember, we talked about that. Plant native vegetation. Manage your pets. And, you know, to the extent that you can, manage your neighbor's pets, but protect your birds from them if you can. We didn't really talk about reducing pesticide use, but it's kind of obvious, and I think most of us who are on this call already try to do that. If there's a natural way to deal with problems, that's always the best way. We call it using the least toxic methods first. And having birds around to eat the insects that may be causing problems is a great way to go. Okay, limit the amount of lawn so that you can have diversity in your landscape. And we didn't really talk about vertical layering, but I did talk about the shrubs and how you're providing cover. Vertical layering would be to provide something for the sparrows, like this picture shows, a ground cover, and then a mid layer. And then if you're lucky enough to have room in your yard for a tree or many trees, then the birds have lots of different levels they can go to get away from predators and to rest and raise babies. And likewise, snags, brush piles, and rock piles are very useful for that kind of thing. So that's what I got, and I wanted to open it up to questions.
Gail, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. There's one question in the chat, and folks feel free to just reach out in the chat and I will moderate, and our Master Gardeners can answer questions. There's something that says, where did you get your bird window deterrents?
Oh, well, I got them on. How do you know I have one? You see it?
See them in your window, Gail.
Yeah, you know, I have more than, oh yeah. I believe those came from Cornell, perhaps. They're available. I would Google it, and some of them you can see, you can't really see them, but the birds can, because they catch the light differently or something. That particular, yeah, I've got a couple.
If you get any birding magazines, they advertise in the magazines also.
Pat, would you talk a little bit about your Sibley V2 app?
Yeah, it's in the App Store. David Sibley is a well-known author of field guides and an illustrator, just a superb illustrator of birds. And the Sibley app, you can get his field guides, but you can also get the app in the App Store for your phone, and it shows ranges of birds. It has range maps and ID tips and the songs and calls that I was playing. I think it was about $35 maybe.
Tracy, if I might add, also there's the Peterson Field Guides app that's available as well, and it covers all the same types of material. So make sure you look at both and decide which is more suitable for you.
Or maybe you want them all.
Or maybe get them all, yeah.
So the next comment is such great information. We have another house that we are doing landscaping on, and we want to plant things that will attract birds, bees, and butterflies. Thank you for all of this information, Gail. So I'm just pasting some things in the chat. You'll notice that in the chat, I put a link to resources, so things that they spoke about today. And you can download that just by right-clicking it. And then I'm gonna paste a link in here that has our public education class resources. And later today, I will have uploaded the 2020 version. But if you go now, you'll see that there is all of the PowerPoint slides that Gail reviewed in this class today. But there's also other classes on butterfly gardening and water-wise gardening, all kinds of topics related to Master Gardeners. So feel free to browse that website. The next question I see, I have heard that hummingbird feeders should be taken down in the fall for the migratory hummingbirds, so they migrate. But Anna's are year-round. What are your recommendations?
Right, that's something that we used to hear about doing, and Anna's are year-round. The bigger thing, they will not fail to migrate just because you're providing them food. They will migrate if they need to migrate. The bigger issue is not letting your nectar ferment. That's very detrimental. It's very harmful to the birds. So you need to adjust the amount of nectar you're if you can, maybe you can't see behind me. I think I have 8 feeders out right now, and I'm filling them every 3 days. That's how many birds I have coming, because I've been doing it for years, and those birds just keep coming back. So, but I reduce that down to 2 feeders in the winter, because that's all, and I don't even fill them full. So you just adjust to the amount of nectar that will be used within the period of time before they ferment. Obviously, they ferment faster in the summer than they do in the winter, but they'll grow mold, and that's also detrimental. So it's not about, you don't need to withhold it to save them from missing out on migration, but you do need to provide healthy food. And that goes for seed feeding too. Your seed can get moldy, mildewy, and that's really bad for the birds. So if you are going to feed, you need to be careful about your cleanliness.
Is it worth? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say there was a question about water features or bird baths, and I don't know if you talked about that before I got on, Gail, but if you can provide a water feature that has a mist or a drip or some kind of flowing, moving water, it will greatly increase the attractiveness of that to birds and other things too. Did you touch on the the other things that we get when we feed birds?
The unintended consequences?
Yeah.
We didn't go over that.
Okay.
And I did wonder if people, I mean, there's a whole second half to the presentation. As Tracy mentioned, a Zoom class isn't really conducive to 3 hours worth of sitting and watching and hearing somebody drone on. The other half of the presentation, I think Pat and I would be happy to go over, and that goes over feeders, a little bit about birdhouses, watering not techniques, but and we'd be happy to present that if anybody's interested in that. There's also plenty. I mean, we're not experts on that. We are master gardeners, and we're trained for that. So this other bird thing is a side passion that we both have, and we wanted to share. But we'd be happy to go over the rest of the presentation at another time and schedule it. If you want that, maybe say something in the chat and we'll talk about it.
Gail, thank you so much. Can everyone just help me give her a round of applause? I know you've got to get off the meeting. We really appreciate you being here and for your expertise today.
Thank you guys very much. I have to admit, I was quite nervous in the first 5 minutes. I couldn't put my words together, but thank you. It was great. And I gotta go.
Thanks, Gail.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Gail.
So Pat, you're on. And the next question is about bluebird houses. Is it worth it to build bluebird houses?
Oh, absolutely. Bluebirds depend on cavities for nesting, and most of us don't like dead trees on our property, so we cut them down, and as a result, the cavity nesters, nuthatches and wrens and bluebirds and woodpeckers have a really hard time finding places to nest. So bluebird boxes, there's a bluebird trail. I think if you put that in your browser, you can find out a lot of information about where to place bluebird boxes, how far apart, other things that might use them, how to build one. Yeah, and they do like an open area though. If you're in the woods, you might not get them coming to something else might move into your bluebird boxes instead. But that's okay.
Okay, and you may have addressed this a little bit, but any tips on best water features or bird baths? And then what about mosquitoes?
Well, if you have moving water, then you won't have a mosquito problem. I've got a natural rock with a hole drilled up through the center of it, and it sits on, probably a 20-gallon thing that's buried in the ground, and there's a pump in there, and so the water comes up that hole and gurgles out the top and runs down the sides and is recirculated, and it runs 24/7 year round. I'm at 2,000 feet. It doesn't freeze. I don't get mosquitoes in there because the water's always moving, and the birds, all the birds love that. I get birds that come to that don't come to feeders, like warblers, occasionally, turkeys. I get all kinds of things coming for a drink. So if you can, and they sell inexpensive drippers that you can attach to a bird bath also, and that dripping water, dripping fountain, if you have a leak in your faucet, that will attract birds also. They like moving water.
Fantastic. Can you recommend a particular seed or seed mix for use in our area?
I used to buy seed mixes that had millet, and I think they had safflower in them and some sunflower seed. And I finally quit buying seed mixes, and I just buy black oil sunflower seed now. I don't get as much waste. I do feed thistle seed, Niger thistle, mostly in the winter, and the goldfinches come to that, and pine siskins sometimes will come to that. But black oil sunflower seed, everybody likes it. And if you want to spend more money, you can get the kind that's out of the shell, so you don't have a mess if you don't like that sunflower seed shells all over the ground.
So this one's about barn owl boxes. We built a barn owl box from Audubon, and we do have barn owls, but they're not nesting in the boxes. Any suggestions?
Oh, I see a lot of those in vineyards, and they put them in orchards so that they attract the owls to eat insects. I don't know how to get owls to come into that box. Sometimes you just have to be patient. We had one at the place where I worked in the past, and kestrels moved into it and raised their babies in that barn owl box. But if you've got barn owls and they're not using it, they must have a good place to live already.
Okay, there's lots of comments about folks wanting the second half of the class, so we'll work on that for you. Let's see.
Oh, here's one about squirrels. Yeah, I have that problem too, and I've been investing in some rather expensive feeders that one of them has a weighted an adjustment so that you can adjust it so that when something heavy gets on it, it will close. And after a while, the squirrels just give up. I've also bought a baffle to go on a pole, and I'm waiting for delivery of another plastic thing that goes over the top of a feeder so that when the squirrels climb up, they can't get onto the little hanging platform feeder. So there are some things you can do to try to keep squirrels out. The other problem I've been having, I'm at 2,000 feet in Placerville, and I've had a bear problem. So now I bring my feeders in every night and take them out again in the morning because the bear just totally destroys the feeders.
Wonderful. Does anyone have any more questions to put to Pat? Wonderful presentation. There's lots of comments, people appreciating your time. I know that moving from a virtual class that's very interactive to an online Zoom format is different. So thank you so much, Gail. Thank you so much, Pat. This was a wonderful class, and we will hope to do the second half in the future. And thank you for joining us this morning. Have a great day, folks.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Pat. It was fantastic.
I'm sorry I couldn't get on at the beginning. I don't know what my problem was.